and press the bell icon so you never miss an update from PrepLadder.
Welcome friends to this discussion of the Civil Services Preliminary Exam 2022 questions on geography. And like last year, we saw that there were good amount of questions which have been asked from the geography part this year. And I have calculated that there were around 15 questions from geography. I could say that out of these 15 questions, we can say that around 11 questions were from more of a core geography type questions, which are more related with the physical geography part, the mapping part, as I have told you before in the classes. And there were two questions which were more from the India yearbook part of the geography chapters which are given, like agriculture, etc. And there were two questions which actually are part of, lie somewhere between geography and environment ecology, mainly from the agriculture part. Okay, so overall I can say that somewhere around 15 questions were there in the examination this year. Out of these 15 questions, I would say that uh, a decent score was somewhere around 12 questions. And we will see that majority of the questions which were there in the exam, we had directly, indirectly discussed them in the classes. And thus, at least from my students, I would expect that you would have fared very well in the geography part of this paper, at least. And overall, I can say that there were lots of questions which were more direct ones. There were some explanatory, more analytical questions as well. As we discuss the questions, I'll be talking about that also, which were belonging to which type of category, and essentially how you could have tackled and everything. But as I said, that out of this 15 questions, 12 questions were must, because see, I will also be later discussing the environment ecology questions. And like last year, I had told you that environment ecology is something which has become difficult in the recent times. And it is expected that a student would not be able to, the strike rate would be somewhere around 50% in environment ecology. And there were lots of questions actually from environment ecology, somewhere around, I would say that near about 20 questions were there from environment ecology. So clearly, as a student, I have to make sure, if I want my name to be in the list of the students who have qualified for prelims, I have to make sure that the areas which are particularly traditional areas like geography, I do very well, and make sure that I maximize my marks here, so that whatever I'm losing in the environment part, environment ecology part, I am able to make for it here. And as you would have seen, the cutoff of last year, it was somewhere around 87 point something. So we know very well, like last year also I was telling you that the paper was difficult, and somewhere around near about 90 the cutoff would be, plus minus 2, and we were more or less near to that range. This year also, I expect that some kind of similar scenario would be there, because there were questions. The paper was overall to the level which was like last year. There were some areas which comparatively were easier than last year, like polity, etc. But there were areas where lots of questions were increased compared to last year, like economy, and in that lots of logical questions, analytical questions were there, were covered. So again, as I said, the paper was more or less like the last year. So we expect that the cutoff would be somewhere around that only. It is possible, however, that the cutoff can little bit be lesser than what was last year, maybe some point marks or 1 mark, mainly because we know that compared to the last year scenario, there are comparatively more number of seats, and I'm saying using the word comparative. So that might be the case. But as I said, somewhere between 87, 89, that will be the cutoff which you can expect. So if you are scoring this much marks, And even if you are suppose 3-4 marks here and there, I would say that you should be preparing for the examination very seriously, because sometimes it happens that what answers we give and what answers UPSC is taking, there might be some variations. Although I can be certain in geography part that there would be no variations, because mostly the questions were direct. Okay, so let us begin without wasting our precious time, and let us talk about the questions which were asked. So first question, I had told you in the strategy discussion of geography that one area which we certainly see the weightage of which has increased in recent times is agriculture. And that was one of the reasons I dealt very well in the particularly the cropping pattern part of the agriculture. But not only the cropping pattern, when you are studying cropping pattern, you have to also study a little bit with respect to the various crops, with respect to the cropping types of technology, the cropping technologies which are used, what are the advantages and disadvantages of such technologies. So again, if you have studied this, and actually this part you also study as a part of environment ecology. So if you have done that, this question was something which was very easy. In fact, it is one of the questions which have already been asked in the examination before. So I am using the series A, where the set of questions was starting, the geography question started from question number 21. And here, the first question was, among the following crops, which one is the most important anthropogenic source of both, and anthropogenic source of both methane and nitrous oxide? Methane and nitrous oxide. So I think that this was a pretty straightforward question, and in fact, most of the students would have actually made this as the correct answer. In fact, remember, I have told you before also that in prelims there are certain questions which you cannot make them wrong. If you make them wrong, there is very high chance that you will miss out on qualifying on the prelims. I would say that this was one of the questions which would be falling under this category. So if you talk about, the answer was essentially B. Rice is one of the crops where we find that which emits, which is one of the major source of methane and nitrous oxide. So in our classes, when we were dealing with the topic of climate change, and when we were talking about the sources of these gases, if you remember, I had separately discussed these gases. We had talked about that paddy fields are one of the sources of these gases. Okay, so rice is one of the crops which is essentially, if you talk about, the source of both methane and nitrous oxide. And very clearly, we know very well that rice essentially is a crop which belongs to the humid areas. And I had talked about the transplantation method where the rice fields are flooded with water. And because they are flooded with water, by the time there is ripening of the crop, the most of the plant parts which are underwater, they are degenerated, and this degeneration is one of the essential cause which leads to the release of methane and the nitrous oxide. Okay, so the answer for this question number 21 in series A, set A, was B, that is the rice system. Okay, so here I have also given you some explanations related with that. Then question number 22, again it is a continuation of, in a way, what was asked in question number 21. So it talks about a special type of rice cultivation system. When I was talking about transplantation method, I did mention this rice intensification system of intensification system, although I didn't go into the detail of that. So sometimes it can happen that we can miss out on certain parts. But again, as a student, it is your duty that if it was mentioned in the class, you should investigate into what exactly it is. Okay, so I was just more superficial in talking about that. But here they have in prelims, as I have told you before, many terms which we generally study, they can go into the depth of those questions. Question number 22 says that system of rice intensification of cultivation in which alternate wetting and drying of rice fields is practiced results in reduced seed requirement. It is absolutely correct. Reduced methane production, because if you talk about rice intensification system, it doesn't requires the flooding of the fields. So in the previous question we saw that degeneration of the parts of the rice plant, that was one of the reasons why so much of methane was essentially released. And here, because there is no such requirement of flooding of the field, only the roots etc have to be wetted in alternate manner, and thus there is lesser use of water and there is no such flooding, and thus what happens, there is reduced methane production which is taking place, and there is reduced electricity consumption. Obviously you can understand that when you are using less amount of inputs like water, just now as I told you, it would essentially mean, because one of the areas where electricity consumption is required is the utilization of water. So if you're using lesser amount of inputs, it obviously means that there will be reduced electricity consumption, and definitely thus the answer should have been D, that is all of the above. Okay, so that is the this question. I would say that this was a question which should have been like I will put it into a tricky category. So depending upon the level of your maturity, you could have attempted this question. If, for example, if you are first timer, maybe you wouldn't have read about it, and maybe you shouldn't have attempted the question. So again, depending upon the level of your preparation, you could have attempted or you could have left this question if you were not very sure. Okay, for example, I would think that as a student I would have been quite sure in the second and third point. It was very logical also. If you talk about, there would have been confusion with respect to some students where they would not have been very clear about the first option, that is the seed requirement reduction. But again, as I said, that this is something which is very popular topic, which is very frequently in news, and this year also it was in news, particularly with respect to the declining productivity which was taking place in the rice crop in southern India. And again, we know that this rice intensification system, which originated in Madagascar and have been adopted by various countries, including India. So we have already successfully experimented it, and thus it was suggested that the rice producing areas in India, particularly those where there is shortage of water, the peninsular India, it should shift to such system, and thus it was in news. So it was actually expected that you should have been aware of it, and clearly the answer was D. Then question number 23, which one of the following lakes Africa has become dry and turned into a desert? So again, I would say that it was out of box question. It was an exceptional question. So because it was in news, it can happen that you would have come across this. It is also a very high possibility that you wouldn't have come across it. So if you would have come across it, you would be knowing the answer. If you wouldn't have, then clearly you wouldn't have been knowing the answer. In that scenario, I would say that it is, again, as I'm saying, exceptional question. If you are lucky enough, then only you will be able to answer the exceptional questions. In this type of question, you should not guess. That is the key word which I want to explain you. Here you should not be making the guesswork, because there is no logic here. It is purely a factual question. Okay, answer here was Lake Fegubin. And if you talk about Lake Fegubin, it is located in the Mali, and here again it has dried up and converted into a desert. Primarily, there are many factors due to which it has happened. You know that this area is actually the Sahel region, which is experiencing, I had talked about this in the climate change lecture, which is experiencing frequent droughts. Also, here what has happened, the land use changes have led to basically the sources of water drying up, and that is also one of the reasons why there has been this change. Okay, so as I said, it was a kind of exceptional question, either you knew or you do not know. Then coming to our next question, question number 24. Gandikota Canyon of South India was created by which one of the following rivers? Again, I would put this question also because I didn't cover that in my class because it is very micro detail in general. And remember, I have before also told you that UPSC has this tendency to ask some of the very, very difficult, very exceptional questions. And this is actually to test your psychology. And if you see a question which you don't know, what it would do, it would put pressure on you. It would make you nervous. But if you're able to control your emotions, if you're able to know that there will always be in the paper some questions which would be out of your range, and you do not falter, you do not become nervous, rest of the questions, what will happen, you will be able to do well. So I believe that this was one of the questions which can fall in this category, and the answer here was C, that is the Pennar River. It forms this Gandikota Canyon, and again it is like the previous one, a very, very factual question, either you know or you do not know. Then consider the following pairs. Now this is one question which I have talked with one two students, and few of them have actually made it wrong. I am so much like surprised that how, if you have prepared well for the examination, how you can make this question wrong. So if we talk about this, it was covered in our mapping classes. So peak, and if you talk about the mountains which were there, which you had to identify which of the pairs were correctly matched. So we know that Namcha Barwa is not located in the Garhwal Himalayas, because Namcha Barwa is a peak. I had told you when I was talking about the drainage systems. If you talk about Brahmaputra River, when it is taking the syntaxial bend, the U turn bend or that hairpin bend, and entering into India, it is taking place from where? From that region. So Namcha Barwa is located exactly around the borders of Tibet and Arunachal Pradesh. So clearly the first option is wrong. Nanda Devi, we have done that in our mapping classes. So Kumaon Himalayas, it is. So this option was absolutely correct. And if you talk about Nokrek, again, if you have made this as wrong, I don't have words to describe, because Nokrek, it is biosphere reserve also, and it is very, very famous, and it is essentially located in Meghalaya, so not in the Sikkim Himalayas. So very clearly the solution here was the only one option was correct, that is Nanda Devi. So option B is the answer. So solution was here B. And again, as I said, very, very factual question. And mapping questions, generally are like this, and you should be prepared. This question which I talked about, it was one of the questions which should not have been wrong. If you have done it wrong, very less chance that you will qualify. Then question number 26, the term Levant, often heard in news, roughly corresponds to which of the following regions? So again, it has been in news, and sometimes like many times, knowledge is not just gained from the formal sources, it also comes from the informal sources. So if you talk about this term Levants, it is many times in the news also you would have heard if you are reading. Otherwise, like there have been a very famous Turkish web series was there, Barbaroslar, and in that they frequently used to talk. It was about the Turkish, and if you talk about the Ottoman Empire, and they frequently use this word Levants. So again, if you also, along with your studies, are doing some kind of spending time, good time here and there, and also with that spending of time, you're also learning again. You see, it is a very good example of how it can be helpful to you. So answer here was the region along the eastern Mediterranean shores, and clearly the solution A is here correct. Okay, so that is again, and this is the area if you talk about where it is there. Then consider the following countries. And if we talk about, again, this was also a mapping question. I don't think that any student who has seriously prepared for the examination should have made it wrong. First day when I was starting my classes, I told you that you cannot study geography without atlas. Whenever you're studying geography, atlas has to be there in front of you, and whatever you are studying, you should just look into the atlas. And in many places, economic geography, etc., etc., I have used several maps where essentially we have discussed these countries which were mentioned here. And again, if you were observant enough, like for example, I have I discussed this when I was discussing in the world mapping geography the region of CIS. So there I have discussed the Central Asian republics, and very clearly the answer, as you know, by this time it was Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Okay, these are the three countries which have, if you talk about borders with Afghanistan. Okay, so the answer here was very clearly, solution was C. So if you look here, it is Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan who make borders with Afghanistan. Okay, so again, a very straightforward, a very simple question. Again, it depends upon whether you had prepared it or not. And if you look into the previous year questions, one thing is very clear. Uh, Particularly the countries which are surrounding India, particularly also some of the important places like some seas, lakes. So, who are making border with them? Again, that is something which you needed to study. I had told you. So, that is this question. Then, moving on to our next question. With reference to India, consider the following statements. Again, this is something which I had directly discussed in the class. Monazite is a source of rare earth. I had discussed rare earth separately and from the perspective of India also. And also, I had discussed monazite separately in the economic geography classes. So, monazite is a source of rare earth, absolutely correct. I had explained you in India, I had explained you the China case and essentially why India is producing and now very serious about producing the rare earth and rare earth minerals, and from where we have the most important sources. I told you that there are two type of sources. One is the monazite sand and the other one is the rock. In India, it is mostly we get the rare earth minerals from the monazite sands. And the second statement is so much famous that again you shouldn't be faltering in this one. Monazite contains thorium, so we know that India has has the largest reserves of thorium, and basically it is contained in the monazite sand. This was something which I had used very clearly. Monazite occurs naturally in the entire Indian coastal sands in India. I was very clear when I was explaining this. I told you that monazite is essentially found along the Malabar coast, along the coast of Tamil Nadu, southern Tamil Nadu particularly, and the coast of Andhra Pradesh. So very clearly, if we talk about the statement number 3 is wrong, and it shouldn't have been, again, if you had done the classes properly, you would have been able to correct that. Then in India, the government bodies can only process or export monazite. Again, this statement is correct. You can understand because monazite contains an atomic mineral. So under the Atomic Energy Act of India, it is only the government bodies who can handle and export and import, if you talk about the monazite. Okay, so because of that, the statement number 4 will be again correct. So the solution, if you talk about, will be B, that is 1, 2, and 4. Okay, so that is this question. So again, I had talked about this in more detail in the class. Then question number 29. In the northern hemisphere, the longest day of the year normally occurs in, and I had taken a separate class in climatology with respect to the seasons of India, and very clearly I had explained you the solstices, the equinoxes. So again, I don't think my students should be making such a mistake, and it should be correct answer. And if you were my student and if you made this mistake, really shame on you. We had spent so much of time here. So again, the answer is the second half of the month of June. And if you remember, we had seen these classes. So it was the summer solstice of the northern hemisphere, which was occurring around somewhere around June 22nd, 23rd. Actually, it is essentially occurring. Okay. So that is again a very straightforward question. Nothing, if you talk about, there to much explain. Then consider the following pairs. Again, this is something which is like mapping. So it is part of the important wetlands which are there in India, and this is something which we always tell you to go through when you are studying your geography, mapping, and also the environment ecology. Also, you actually study this. So if you talk about here, the question was like this year UPSC had done some novelty in the paper, and they, rather than giving the options in these, the entries in these options, what they had done, they had just given only one pair, only two pairs, only three pairs, and all four pairs. So actually what it does, it eliminates in fact the chances that a student would be able to answer this through just reverse engineering, through critical thinking. So actually, if you do not know this properly, then you wouldn't have been able to answer this question. Okay. But remember that before also, it was not like always you could solve the questions with reverse engineering. Many times the options were made in such a manner that there will be always difficulty in solving the question. So when it comes to mapping, mapping is something which you have to be very, very certain. And this is why I always recommend my students that in the last few days when you are revising for the prelims, mapping is something which you have to very, very thoroughly revise, because the questions which come, they are very straightforward, and again, you can definitely get that correct if you have done that. So there was Hokera wetland which was mentioned. We know that it is not in Punjab, it is in Jammu and Kashmir. If you talk about, there was Renuka Sagar wetland which was mentioned, and we know which is very, very famous wetland. It is there in Himachal Pradesh. Then there was Rudra Sagar Lake which is mentioned. Again, it is a very famous lake of Tripura. So second and third entries both were correct. And there was Sastam Kota. If you talk about wetland was mentioned, and the pair was given as Tamil Nadu. And again, Kota, even with little bit of logic, the term is normally very frequently used in Kerala. So actually, it is not located in Tamil Nadu, it is in Kerala. So the answer was that there were two pairs which were correct. So the correct answer would be B here. So again, you can see that, for example, there is in Jammu and Kashmir this Hokera wetland is there. There is in Tripura Rudra Sagar is there. If you talk about Renuka wetland is essentially located here, and yes, this is the Sastam Kota lake located in Kerala. So again, as I said, it was a very core mapping question. Either if you knew, you would have definitely done it correctly. Then moving on, if a major storm reaches the earth, which of the following are the possible effects on the earth? Now, there were some number of entries given, and I had told you when I was taking the classes, I was very clear with respect to this. I had talked about the magnetosphere, the magnetic storms in the topic of geomorphology after I discussed the interior of our topic. And I had specifically talked about, in fact, I told you that because this year what had happened, magnetic storms have occurred. So it is very, very high possibility that the question would be asked. In fact, in the rapid revision classes also, I talked about this aspect, that there can be a question coming from this area. in prelims. So again, we were not surprised when we saw this question in the examination. And again, I have told you what would be the impact. So GPS and navigation systems could fail. Question is in this, the second option was tsunamis could occur at equatorial region. When we were studying tsunami, I discussed with you multitude of reasons for occurrence of tsunami, and I never discussed about the solar storms can actually cause tsunami. So very, very clearly, second option was totally wrong. And if a student just knows this part, you can see that there are three options, A, B, and D, in which second option is given. There's only one option, that is C, where it is essentially not given. And very clearly, the answer was C here. Then power grids could be damaged, again because it is an electromagnetic storm. I have explained you how these electromagnetic storms occur. I had in fact shown you the video of the occurrence of these electromagnetic storms, how they are occurring, how the magnetic reconnections are taking place. I explained you so this would definitely can have impact on the power grids. Intense auroras, I have explained you how the auroras would be taking place. uh, Fifth option, just leave it, I'll discuss that. Sixth, orbit of satellites could be disturbed. We know very well that because it is very much affecting the ionosphere, so that can affect the orbits of the satellites. Shortwave radio communication of the aircraft flying over the polar regions could be interrupted. We have seen that how this was more concentrated towards the polar regions, the impact of the solar flares, which was also causing the aurora. So again, this option was also correct. So as I told you, 1, 3, 4, 6, and 7 were correct. Now coming to the option number 5, forest fires could take place much over much of the planet. Now, because there were this year I told you that there were magnetic storms, and also we know that in the northern hemisphere there were several forest fires, particularly in the temperate region. So there was some suggestion that were they related with these magnetic storms. We can definitely say that the research was inconclusive and there was no agreement on this, that it could actually lead to such forest fires. And there is a general consensus, what knowledge we have till today, there is a general consensus that the magnetic storms, they generally cause the electromagnetic disturbances. So those things would be affected which are more electromagnetic. There is a general consensus that it doesn't much interfere with our climatic system. And if you talk about the forest fires, essentially these are more related with the climatic system. We know that there is global warming, there is drying taking place, and that is one of the primary reason for the increase in the forest fires, as I had discussed in the topic of climate change. Okay, so again, if you talk about here, the answer was C. Then question number 62, consider the following states: Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Himachal Pradesh, and Tripura. How many of the above are generally known as the tea producing states? Again, this is something which was straight from the classes, and I don't think that students should have made this mistake. Tea, I had discussed in detail the cropping pattern of tea. So except Andhra Pradesh, we know that Kerala, Himachal Pradesh, and Tripura are the very, very important states where tea is cultivated. And very important here, there was one trick, and this is these words, generally known as. That means, see, in Andhra Pradesh also we know that there is Eastern Ghats, and along the Eastern Ghats, on the windward slopes of the Eastern Ghats, there is enough rainfall. So there might be some cultivation of tea. But Andhra Pradesh is not a state which is generally known as a tea producing state. Okay, that is why Andhra Pradesh will not be taken as the correct option in this. So that means here there were three states which was the answer, that is the solution is C. Then, so in fact, if you remember in our notes which I had given you, I had actually given you this map. So you can see in this map, it is very, very clear which are the areas where tea is essentially produced. So it is Kerala, parts of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, some parts of Telangana, and Himachal, Uttarakhand are the areas. West Bengal is the major producer with along with Assam, and it stretches into Tripura as well. Parts of Odisha also is one of the states where tea is essentially produced. So if you had just gone through this map which I used in the class while explaining the pattern of cultivation of tea, the cropping pattern of tea, I think you should have made this option very, very correct. So this is something, if you have done wrong, for me it is something like a very, very blunder. Then consider the following pairs, and again here some reservoirs were mentioned, and there was again they didn't give you that chance of reverse engineering. Here there was a trick, and I found actually one of the answer keys also which was wrong. Some of the students which have who have done marked it correctly, here it was not correctly written. And I know such mistakes can happen, and this is these mistakes, this is this alertness which actually defines your success in the examination. So it was not correctly matched. Okay, so we find that in this case there was only one correct option which was there, that is the Gandhi Sagar, which is located on Chambal River in Madhya Pradesh. Okay, so that was the only correct option. If you talk about Ghat Prabha, it is not in Telangana, it is essentially in Karnataka. If you talk about Indra Sagar, it is not in Andhra Pradesh, actually it is in Madhya Pradesh. And Maithan, you know, Damodar River, and we know very well that it is not in Chhattisgarh, it is in Jharkhand. So there were actually 3 entries which were not correct. That means the option should have been C, that is the only 3 pairs. And I know that, as I told you, some have marked only one pair because they didn't read the question properly. It was saying not correct. Okay, so that is the thing. Then in India, what is the role of coal controllers organization? Now, this is a question which I would say that it was not a traditional geography, very, very clearly. It was definitely not a traditional geography question. And but I have put it here because when I suggest that you prepare geography, one of the suggestions is always that you, related with geography, there are chapters which you should ideally read from the India yearbook. Okay, so there you will be finding these type of information which should be ideally, because you know India yearbook is considered as one of the bibles for the preparation of civil services. So again, this is one area where a student should have invested some time, particularly geography areas are the areas where lots of actually questions are asked. So if you talk about coal controllers organization, so here if you talk about the option one, says that coal controller organization is the major source of coal statistics in government of India. So we know that it is one of the important role which has been given to the coal controllers organization. Then second, it monitors progress of development of captive coal and lignite blocks. So it is controllers organization. So again, this is one of the very, very important duty which has been assigned to it. It hears any objections to the government's notification relating to acquisition of coal bearing areas. This is also one of the functions which is performed by the coal controllers organization. Fourth one, it ensures that coal mining companies deliver the coal to end users in the prescribed time. This option is essentially wrong. Now, although we can say that it was like a question which required lots of study, one thing is very clear, that we know that there was coal crisis in India. So when I was discussing the last mains questions also, I had discussed the coal crisis, the energy crisis. And again, if you talk about, this is something which was to be prepared, which was to be expected, because lots of bodies came into highlight in news why we are facing coal crisis, who is responsible for that and everything. And again, in this context, you should have known that this is not one of the uh, duties or one of the functions which is done by the coal controllers organization. Because if it was so, then what would have happened, we wouldn't have been essentially facing the problem of coal crisis which have been occurring in India. So very clearly the option here was, which was correct, was A, that is 1, 2 and 3. Then uh, next question, with reference to the tea board in India, consider the following statement. Again, same thing, a question which is mainly, I would say, uh, you could put this question even in the governance part, but we know that because in prelims there is no such specifically mentioned area of governance. So it is general GK which you can relate with the parent topics. So I have related it with geography because it is related with agriculture, which is essentially very important part of geography. And as I told you, for these type of questions, India Yearbook is the key source. Okay, so again, if you talk about the tea board is a statutory body, yes, this statement is correct. Again, it is factual question. So first statement was correct. It is a regulatory body attached to Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. This was wrong because it is not attached to Ministry of Agriculture. It is essentially attached to Ministry of Commerce. Then tea board's head office is situated in Bengaluru. Again, I would just, sometimes some of the questions are where actually you can use some logic. Okay, so this option third was something which little bit looks to me illogical, because we know that the largest producer of tea in India is not uh, Karnataka, but it is West Bengal. So ideally, generally what happens, the head offices of these boards relating to crops are located in the areas which are the major producer. So very clearly it is not Bangalore, it is essentially where it is in Kolkata. The board has overseas offices at Dubai, Moscow, and there is one more where it is located. So very clearly, if you talk about the statement 4 is also correct. So the option should be D, that is 1 and 4. So that is one of the questions which was there. So these were the questions which I have allocated to the geography part. Okay. And in another video, what I will be doing is I will discuss the environment ecology questions. As I told you, the overall impression that we get from this paper, and as I have discussed with you, this geography paper was, these geography questions were quite on the medium to medium difficulty type. Okay, medium difficulty I'm saying because there was lots of factual aspect involved in the mapping. But again, these were not so much, if you leave 1 2 questions, these were not so much type of questions where a student who has prepared well for UPSC general studies is not expected to know them. Okay, so out of these 15 questions, as I have told you, I would expect my student to be in a position to answer correctly 11 12 questions. 1 2 questions, as I told you, you could have left. 1 2 questions could have been mistakes, but in general I would expect you that you would have solved around 11 to 12 questions. So if you have done 11 to 12 questions from this area, you can be rest assured that you will be like getting a positive result. And obviously, it is required that in other areas also you would have done well. Okay, so that's it for this part, friends. Lots of questions, around 20 questions from environment ecology. And as we have seen before also, it is to no surprise, there are lots of questions every year almost on environment ecology. And this year, it was 5th of June when the paper was there. It was World Environment Day. So we were already expecting that environment will be covering a significant area. Now, UPSC didn't disappoint us in this part of the paper. Like it has done before, it always surprises in environment ecology. There were questions which were very, very difficult to deal with. And I have told you that if you are able to maintain a strike rate of around 50% and above in environment ecology, that is a very, very good score. And that means you have actually prepared well. One thing that was quite good this year from environment ecology part was that there were very straightforward questions from current affairs. And some of these were so much popular, so much in news, that I believe that any student who has prepared seriously for the examination this year would have been aware of those terms. And thus, very clearly, we can say that uh, essentially, if you had prepared those current affairs part, you would have been, this paper of this part of environment ecology would not have been so much difficult for you. And like always, every year there is a mix of questions which are asked. Some questions related with the theory of ecosystem ecology and related, if you talk about concepts, some questions related with some statutes which are there for the protection of environment. And the third category from where very frequently questions are asked is the pollution. In our classes, we had specifically focused upon the topic of pollution and environmental change. And the another area is, as I told you, very frequently comes in this environment ecology part is the current affairs part. Okay, so let us start without spending much time in overall. So if you talk about the first question, again, first question itself in the set A started from question number 41, and it was a current affairs related question. It was in news, a climate action tracker which monitors the emission reduction of countries, and there were four options from which you had to choose. Now, this is something which I call it as a very direct factual question. So, if you have read about it, you will be in a position to answer that. The answer was A, that it is a database created by collision of research organizations. So, you would have been in a position to answer this question if you wouldn't have come across the climate action tracker. Then again, it was not a question where you should have taken a guesswork. So it was totally out of, these are the questions which can actually break your selection process. So if you take a wild guess here, then what will happen? Very high chance that the answer would be wrong, and it would amount to negative marking, as you know. So in such questions which are very so much factual, you shouldn't be taking any wild guesses. Okay, so here, because till you have read it, this factual part, you wouldn't be aware of the answer. Okay, so it is the database created by collision of research organizations, and there were actually a collaboration of two organizations, Climate Analytics and New Climate Institute. uh, they have been actually, they have developed this venture. Okay, so that is basically this first question, and it was, as I said, a very factual one. Then if you talk about second, which was 42, consider the following statements. Climate Group is an international non-profit organization that drives climate action by building large networks and run them. So this was one statement. Then International Energy Agency is in partnership with Climate Group, a global initiative called EP100. So EP100 was in news, and EP100 brings together leading companies committed to driving innovation in energy efficiency and increasing competitiveness while delivering on emission reduction goals. Some Indian companies are members of EP100, and the International Energy Agency is the secretary to the under to coalition. So again, in this, if you talk about the, there is no, if you talk about partnership of International Energy Agency with Climate Group to produce this EP100. First statement was very correct. Second statement, in fact, was wrong, and third statement, EP100, it was correct. Some Indian companies, that is also correct. Fifth statement is essentially wrong, because this secretariat to under to coalition, it is actually the Climate Group which is the secretariat. So going by this, the answer should have been B, that is 1, 3 and 4. So if you talk about, for example, Mahindra and Mahindra was became the first Indian company to join the EP100 initiatives. In fact, there are others also like Dalmia Cement, etc. Okay, so again, this question, if you again look into, It is very, very clear. It is pretty much clear, very factual question. So hardly there is a choice of critical thinking. If you think that you'll be able to solve this question by just reverse engineering or critical thinking, again, I am not very sure that you'll be able to do that. So specifically, if you have studied about the climate group, which was in news, then only you'll be able to answer this question. And if you've seen in environment ecology, there are actually quite such questions where I would say that you don't have to go for those blinders like guesses, blind guesses. Okay, so again, this is another question which was in the same category. Then this was a question which was, I think, majority of the students should have made it correct. There was a big article, I think I don't remember, it was either Indian Express was there or Hindu it was there, about, if you talk about the rainforest being the kidneys of the world. So if rainforests and tropical forests are the lungs of the earth, then surely the wetlands function as its kidneys. So there was very big article on this. As a student of UPSC, you are expected to read your newspapers, magazines, and it was also covered in some of the magazines. So it should have been known to you. Suppose even if it was not known, this was a question which could have been answered logically. So if you talk about functions as kidney, so first is you should know that what is the main function of the kidney. So kidney basically removes the waste, the excreta from the body, the waste products from the body. That is the primary, very, very primary function of the kidney. It purifies the blood which is there. So again, all these options were correct with respect to the wetlands, but we had to choose the option which is more in similar to wetlands being functioning as the kidney. And the option which was there was aquatic plants absorb heavy metals and excess nutrients. So essentially, the solution, if you talk about, the answer of this was question number 43 should have been D. Others also, if you look into, it was all of these were essentially correct. So water cycle in wetlands involves surface runoff, subsoil percolation and evaporation. So again, it is correct. Algae from the nutrient base upon which fish, crustaceans, mollusks, birds, reptiles and mammals thrive. So again, it is correct. Wetlands play a vital role in maintaining the sedimentation balance and soil stabilization. Again, it is very correct. But we had to look into what is the basic function of a kidney. And accordingly, we had to answer, and thus the answer should have been D. And as I said, this was something where you, even if you had not read that article, you could have taken a guess, a logical guess, and you will get the correct answer. Then moving on to next question, in the context of WHO air quality guidelines, consider the following. This not exactly related with WHO air quality guidelines I had dealt in the class, but overall I had dealt with the air pollutants where I had talked about the PM particles, where I had talked about the ozone in the troposphere. So just based upon that information, you should have been in a position to answer this question. And first statement, actually little bit of knowledge was required for the WHO air quality guidelines. So if you talk about, this is something again which is in news. In fact, I had given it in the notes. I had also discussed this part also. So there it was there in your notes which were given. So 24-hour mean of PM 2.5 should not exceed 15 micrograms per meter cube, and annual mean of PM 2.5 should not exceed the 5 micrograms per meter cube. So this statement was absolutely correct. That is the guidelines which are given in the WHO air quality guidelines. So that is one. Then in a year, highest level of ozone occur during the periods of inclement weather. So here just you had to think about what is essentially an inclement weather. So inclement weather is a type of weather when there is lots of rain, stormy type of weather, a bad weather condition is essentially an inclement weather. We had studied that ozone formation at many places. I had explained you the formation of ozone. Starting in the first few lectures of climatology itself, in environment ecology also I explained you. So we know that in troposphere, the ozone production is related with, it is produced as a result of photochemical reaction. That means lots of sun rays are required for production of ozone in the troposphere. So again, if it is inclement weather, that means that the chances of production of ozone would be less. So very clearly, statement 2 would be wrong. Then PM10 can penetrate the lung barrier and enter the bloodstream. Now this statement was partly correct. It can actually, not partly correct, it PM10 can actually penetrate deep into the lungs, but it cannot enter the bloodstream. It cannot penetrate the barrier of the lungs. It can go deep into the lungs, but it doesn't enters into the bloodstream. So we have seen already in the classes, I had given you a chart on the air pollution. It was very clearly written there that it is not the PM10, but it is the PM2.5 which actually enters in the bloodstream. Then, so that means this statement was also wrong. Excessive ozone in the air can trigger asthma. Very clearly, this statement is correct. The chart which I had given, and in the rapid revision also, I had very quickly discussed the effects of the tropospheric ozone which is there, and asthma was one of the diseases which we saw that it is related with the excessive amount of ozone being present. So that means the answer of this statement should have been, this question should have been B, that is 1 and 4. Okay, so this is something which was there, we had studied, and you should have been in a position to answer that. Then question number 45, with reference to Gucci sometimes mentioned in news, consider the following statement. So again, the statement itself, the question itself mentions that it was in news. So it was actually quite in news, and for the development of the Himalayas, it was talked about that because Himalayan region is an eco-sensitive region. So there, some kind of such agriculture should be done, which is high, which gives you high prices for the products which are grown. And thus what will happen, you don't need to do low productivity agriculture, which disturbs the environment rapidly. Okay, so it is one of the if you talk about the crops which can be very profitable in the development of the Himalayan region. So basically, Gucci, if you talk about, it was essentially a mushroom which is belonging to the fungus family. It grows in some Himalayan forest areas, mainly in the western Himalayas. It was very clearly in news. It is commercially cultivated in Himalayan foothills of northeastern India. This was wrong because it is not in the northeastern India, it is in the western Himalayas, the temperate and the foothill regions of the western Himalayas. So Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal, Uttarakhand, those areas. Okay, so if we look into very clearly, the solution should have been 1 and 2, that was C. Okay, so that is again more news related, more factual. In such news related factual questions, again I would repeat, there is no chance you can do the blind guesses here. If you do, there is more chance that it would go wrong and it would accumulate in your negative marking score. Then with reference to the polyethylene terephthalate, the use of which is so widespread in our daily lives, consider the following statements. Mainly it is a type of plastic which we are using, and there were a number of statements. Its fibers can be blended with wool and cotton fibers to reinforce their properties. Okay, so this was one of the statements which was asked, which was present. This statement was correct, and sometimes these things have been always, many times they are in news. So many companies, in fact in recent times particularly, I've seen many sports companies, they in a way to show that how they are very eco-friendly, they show that how they are using the recycled plastic bottles, which are basically made of this PET, to essentially produce these fibers. Okay, produce these fibers. So again, this statement was very, very clearly correct. Then second statement was container made of it can be used to store any alcoholic beverages. Again, this is wrong. So alcoholic beverages cannot be stored. Bottles made of it can be recycled into other products. So again, this is one of the very important property of these PETs, that they can be recycled. As I told you, they are recycled into fibers which can be used to make clothes. Okay, so Nike, for example, was advertising that how much eco-friendly the clothes are, because they are using the recycled these PET bottles essentially to produce these clothes. So option 3 is also correct here. Then articles made of it can be easily disposed of by incineration without causing greenhouse gas emission. So again, there will be greenhouse gas emission if you are burning it, incinerating it. Okay, so uh, if you burn plastics, there will be greenhouse gas emissions which would be there. So the option should have been 1 and 3, and it was option A which should have been correct. Then which of the following is not a bird? Again, a very straightforward question, a factual question. In the previous one, you could have used some of the logic, even if you didn't know, like I was using, you could have used some of the logic to essentially find the correct answer there. But in this one, there is no such scope for blind guess. So if you didn't know, again, this is one of the questions which can accumulate your negative marking scores, which can be very, very bad for your overall score. So answer, if you talk about, it was golden mahseer, which is essentially a fish of southern India. Okay, so it is a very straightforward question. So frequently it is mainly found in the Kaveri river. So that was the answer of that. So very factual, no scope of blind guess. Remember this. Which of the following are nitrogen fixing plants? Now this is also something which is a very factual type question. As I told you, environment ecology was a little bit difficult because of this fact based questions. Although here little bit of reverse engineering could have been used. We know that uh, nitrogen fixing plants are leguminous plants. Okay, so I know that alfalfa is a grass which is essentially a leguminous plant. Then chickpea also, I know that it is a pulse which is essentially also, pulses are leguminous in nature. So 1 and 3, I would essentially be searching for 1 and 3, and I'll find that 1 and 3 is an option which is there in A and B. Okay, A and B. Then if you talk about uh, amaranth, maybe I would know, maybe I would not know. Others, if you talk about clover, again, maybe I know, maybe I don't know. Purslane, I don't know. Spinach, little bit I know about it. And it is essentially, I know that it is not a leguminous plant. So this shouldn't be there. And just if I eliminate spinach from there, again, I get my answer. That means B cannot be the answer. It should be option A, that is 1, 3, and 4. So here, little bit of reverse engineering. Even if you didn't know all of these, you could have got the correct answer. So this is one of the questions. This is one of the ways in which you would be approaching the questions, where you will be doing some guesswork. Okay, so this was one question where you could have made a logical guess. Then biorock technology is talked about in which one of the following situations? So this was a very straightforward question, very much in news, because it was about the restoration of damaged coral reefs, a new technology where passing of electricity would help in accumulation of the carbonate, which would revive the growth of the corals. Many times 4 to 6 times faster growth was seen. So again, this was something which was in news, and as a serious student of UPSC, you should have been aware about the biorock technology. Okay, so the answer was very clearly A. In this, there is nothing like, so they are essentially passing the electricity, and they are doing what? Through that results in calcium carbonate formation. So coral larvae adhere to the calcium carbonate, and they are growing very quickly because of that. So that is basically one of the techniques which have been developed, because We have talked in the classes also, coral bleaching is one of the big issues that the world is facing. And if it goes by like this, ultimately we'll find that 99% of the surface coral reefs would vanish. So we are doing lots of research to make sure that we are able to save at least some of these reefs which are at so much threat of global warming. Okay. Then Miyawaki method is well known for, I don't remember, I had read in Express or it was in Hindu, with lots of pictures. There was uh, this explanation of what is this Miyawaki method, and it was very clearly that the option was C. So again, something which I expect my students to be aware of. If you're a serious student, you should have done that. So this is one of the areas where you would have made it correct. Although if you didn't had studied, okay, it was something which hardly logic could have been essentially used, because we are talking about Miyawaki. The term actually is Japanese term. So again, if I try to apply, okay, maybe I can eliminate option A, but it would be very difficult to, on what basis I will eliminate option B or option D. So again, here the blind guess shouldn't have, it wouldn't have worked. There was very high chance that it would go in the negative realm. So if you hadn't studied, no need to attempt such questions. They will just give you a burden in the form of negative marking. So it was option C which was there. Then, so that is this method which I have given you. Which one of the following has been constituted under the Environment Protection Act 1986? A more traditional question, and as we know, it is the Central Groundwater Authority which has been constituted under the Environment Protection Act 1986. So again, very straightforward question, knowledge based, traditional reading, and it would have given the answer. Then, which one of the following statements best describes the polar code? Again, in news, and more, I would say it was more related with current affairs, but I have put it here. I could have put it also in geography actually. I ideally should have put this question in geography. So answer is A here. It is an international code of safety for ships operating in the polar waters. Okay, so it is a very straightforward question that was about the polar code. Then, which one of the following best describes the term greenwashing? Again in news, and it was again option A, conveying a false impression that companies' products are eco-friendly and environmentally sound. So green washing, two words. If you would have read, definitely you would have answered this question. If you wouldn't have read, probably I would say here is one question where might be you could have taken a blind guess depending upon the term which was essentially used. Okay, so others like non-inclusion of ecological environmental costs in annual financial statements of a country. Okay, washing means removing something, or uh, something which is blinding someone, something like that, cheating someone. So that is a kind of term which we are using here when washing. So B, I would not go for that. Ignoring the disastrous ecological consequences while undertaking infrastructure development, little bit of confusion, but still making mandatory provisions for environmental costs in the government project program. So again, D was absolutely wrong. Basically, the choice, if I was making a blind guess, should have been between A and C. And if it is my lucky stars, then I would have got the correct answer. Okay, but again, as I said, it was in news, so there are several misleading labels which are there. There are trustworthy certifications which better tell us about how much eco-friendly the company is working. Okay, so that is basically the greenwashing. Then consider the following statements. High clouds primarily reflect solar radiations and cool the surface of the earth. High clouds, actually, what they do, they are very thin clouds. We have studied in clouds, they are very thin clouds. They are unable to stop much of the incoming solar radiations. But the outgoing radiations of the earth, they are able to trap them. So basically, what they are doing, they are, rather than cooling the surface of the earth, they are more leading to the warming of the surface of the earth. So statement 1 is wrong. Low clouds have high absorption of infrared radiations emanating from the Earth's surface and thus cause warming effect. It is again, this statement is wrong, because if you talk about the low clouds are very thick clouds, and what essentially they are doing is they are trapping the solar radiations, they are reflecting the solar radiations. Remember, when we were talking about the albedo of the Earth, we saw that the maximum albedo is of the clouds. Clouds have the maximum, and much of these are essentially the low clouds. So thus they are, in fact, rather than warming, they are what they are doing, they are cooling because they are reflecting the incoming solar radiation. That means option 2 is also wrong. So the correct option should have been D, neither 1 nor 2. Then, with reference to the Indian laws about wildlife protection, consider the following. Again, a traditional question. Reading of the Wildlife Protection Act would have give you the correct answer. Even here also little bit of logic should have been used. So wildlife animals are sole property of the government. There was a case which had very clearly declared that they are the sole property of the government. When when a wild animal is declared protected, such animal is entitled for equal protection whether it is found in protected areas or outside. So it is entire India. So when a wild animal is declared protected, it is in entire India and not only in the protected areas. So option second was also correct. So if 1 and 2 are correct, you don't need to even read the third one, because there is no other option. So option A, that is 1 and 2. So third, apprehensions of a protected wild animal becoming danger to human life is sufficient ground for its capture or killing. Here the term apprehension should have been enough to tell you that just on the basis of apprehension you cannot say that uh, animal is danger to human life, or it poses some kind of danger. Okay, so again option 3 was wrong, and more explanation I have given you. So it is basically the chief wildlife warden who essentially decides what to do with such animals, and there should be sufficient evidence that they have essentially become a threat. Okay, so that is basically the case. So I was talking about the court judgment. Bombay High Court judgment essentially declared that the wild animals, if you talk about, they are the property of the state, whether they are alive or even when they are dead. Okay, and statement 2, that the governing subject under Wildlife Protection Act 1972, it is very clear that there should not be discrimination inside the protected areas and outside. That means throughout the country they are protected. Okay, that is why the first two options are correct there. Then moving on, certain species of which one of the following organisms are well known as cultivators of fungi? Actually, it is insecta which has such symbiotic relationship, being the cultivators of fungi. And if you look into this, the main is the ant. So this is something which is part of environment ecology, but a very typical question, maybe may not be. This is a question where a deep knowledge was required. So I would say that I was not expecting that many would be making this essentially answer correct, and little bit of biological understanding would have done. Okay, so the option was ant here. Then consider the following: carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, ozone, and sulfur dioxide. Which excess of which of the following in the environment are causes of acid rain? So again, if you are my student, or even if you are a general student, acid rain I had talked about at several places when I was talking about the components of the atmosphere at the beginning of climatology topic. There also I had discussed about this. Then in environment ecology I had specifically discussed about the acid precipitation. So we know that the answer here was nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxide. So the answer should have been 2 and 4 only, and that is basically the correct answer related with this question. So as you can see, there were lots of questions from environment ecology. Not much had changed from what we saw last year. There were lots of factual direct questions from news. If you have read, you will be able to answer. If you have not read, you won't be able to answer them. Okay, I would say that in these 20 questions, if your score is somewhere around 40 to 50%, you have done well in the environment ecology question, and provided, like we saw in geography, you have done well. So again, it would help you. That would be, I think, sufficient for you. If you have done well in also other areas, that would be good hope for you to get selected in the examination. Okay. And this year, as I said, there were many very straightforward direct questions from current affairs and very popular current affairs. So that was one added advantage that we had compared to last year with respect to the environment ecology questions. Okay. So that's for today, friends. So this is the paper. Now, for those of you who are essentially getting a score of somewhere around, I would say 85 plus, should not waste a single day. You should from today itself make your plan, what you are going to do in the next 3 months, how you are approaching your mains. There is very, very high chance that you will get through. So even if you are somewhere around, I would say even if you are in 80s, because we saw that this year the cutoff was 87. That means that there will be always, if there's no year when there is no not presence of 4 5 controversial question. Can you understand, 4 5 controversial questions can change your entire fate? So even if you are getting 83 84, maybe some of your questions which you think they are wrong, they might get correct and you will be on the other side, you will be on the side which gets selected. And if you waste your time till the result is coming, these 20 25 days will be crucial in what will be your mains result. So you don't have to waste time. If you are anywhere in 80 plus category, you have to prepare for the mains. Obviously, those who are below this category, you need to work hard for the next year. And as we have seen that if we do the basics, what we study in the class, if we read our current affairs properly, the paper is not so much, if you talk about dicey or so much out of box as it is popularized by many times by some of the institutes, some of the teachers. It is all within our range, provided what we have studied, we do it very thoroughly. What is given material to you, each and every part of that material you should read. We saw that how just by reading many things which we did in the class, just by paying attention to the maps, you could have got the correct answers. Okay, so what you have to do, if you're getting below this, that means your preparation was not up to the mark. But you don't have to lose heart. You have to make sure that next year you will be doing well. And you know that we at PrepLadder, we are providing, and this scheme is valid only for next few days, uh, the 12-month subscription of our course, GS course, in just 6,990 rupees. So it is a very, very optimum opportunity for you, very important opportunity which you shouldn't be losing in any case, because all the lectures are very well refined, best teachers are taking the classes, the content is very good, and it will definitely help you out in the next year prelims. Okay friends, with this message, let us stop for today and we'll meet again in the future. Goodbye, take care.